Hello, once again, thank you for joining us on Space Nuts. It's a show all about astronomy and space science. My name is Andrew Dunkley. I am your host. And today we're going to celebrate a birthday, the Parkes Radio Telescope in New South Wales. It's only 120 kilometres down the road from where I am. It has just turned 60 years old, so that's extraordinary and still going strong. We will also be looking at, speaking of telescopes, the benefits of putting a telescope past Saturn. Now, I know we talk about the James Webb Telescope and where it's going to go, but there are now thoughts that we should probably put one out past Saturn, and Fred will explain why. Apparently, there are some real benefits into doing that. And audience questions today from Jim, who wants to challenge Einstein. Also, Damien, who wants to talk about something completely different today, dark matter. And Robert has got a question about Mercury, which I find fascinating, but even more fascinating was his second question about what we need to look for and how we might detect the light being produced by aliens on other planets. We produce light, which travels out into space. So how would we detect the light of other civilizations, like from their streets and houses and sporting fields and the like? That's a great question. So we'll be tackling all of that today on Space Nuts. And joining me as always is astronomer at large, Professor Fred Watson, the space nut, space warper himself. Hello, Fred.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you. Yes, a space warper. I like that. I wonder where that idea came from.
I don't know. How's the book going, by the way?
Could have been here.
There it is.
Well, I don't know. I assume somebody's buying a copy. It went into the bookshops on Monday this week, 3 days ago. 2 days ago. It has had some nice responses from the media. I've done a lot of radio interviews and a couple of things like that, which include, I had a nice chat with Ian Connellan, who is the editor-in-chief, I think, of Cosmos magazine.
Oh, wow.
Which is one of the leading science magazines here in Australia, and he tweeted the recording this morning. I think it's basically a video conversation, mainly because I could see myself on the tweet. But he's picked up on a story I told him about when I was a youngster trying to observe the sky with actually a borrowed telescope at that time. It belonged to my history teacher at school. He was very generous to lend it to me. A telescope. About 4 feet long, made of brass, ancient machine. I had it in the back garden, and a large policeman turned up and said, hello, 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 what's going on here then? And he thought somebody had phoned him up, phoned the police to say there was a kid playing around with a bazooka in the backyard. So anyway, that's turned up in this record. I'd forgotten I mentioned that. Actually.
That's funny.
Turned up in this recording, Cosmos.
That is funny. Oh dear, dear, oh dear. As long as you weren't making rocket engines in the garage and fueling them with motor mower petrol, you're
fine. I did the rocket engines too, but fortunately nobody turned up after that.
Oh dear, it's funny. Well, from all the comments I've seen in the Twitter sphere and on Facebook through the podcast group, people are pretty excited about your book, Fred. So
that's lovely to hear. Thank you, Andrew. That's the first report I've had of anybody other than the media who's vaguely interested in
quite
it.
a few people busting a gut to get a hold of it. So I think you'll be fine.
Very
you
good.
You might get enough for a chicken dinner or something. Now, that's all I get.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Parkes Radio Telescope, which has just celebrated its 60th birthday, commissioned on the 31st of October, 1961. And the story behind this telescope is intriguing. I see it maybe a couple of times a year driving past where it's located just north of Parkes in central west New South Wales. And it is a sight to behold. You just can't miss it. It's just, it's so prominent on the landscape there, and it's still in the middle of sheep paddocks or wheat paddocks, is it?
It's sheep paddocks. Or it was last time I was there. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I think the Parkes dish for all optical visible light telescopes are closest to my heart. I think the Parkes dish is one of the most beautiful telescopes in the world, because it's set in the Gubang Valley, and when you see it from the road, you see this background of hills behind it, and the pasture lands that it stands in, and it's unmissable, exactly as you've said. It's just a few kilometres from the main highway, and I'm surprised there aren't more accidents.
I was about to say that. It's quite a distraction.
It's a distraction, yeah. You've got to look at it and see where it's pointing, things of that sort. But yes, it is 60 years old, or it was on Sunday. It was launched on Halloween Day in 1961. Yes, if any of our listeners feel like checking out the conversation, which is an online news feed. Actually, it's run by experts who are also journalists. That's the way it's supposed to be. But there is a piece there by John Sarkisian, who's I think he's telescope operations manager. He's an operations scientist. I know John very well. He's a great guy, a great science communicator. Has been based at Parkes for certainly as long as I've known him. Instrumental, incidentally, in running the David Malin Awards, which I don't know whether you know about. I'm sure we've talked about them before. David Malin, another good friend, but also the man who effectively put colour imagery into astronomy back in the 1970s. And nowadays, amateur astronomers are doing work that rivals what David did with the Anglo-Australian telescope back then. And John and he kicked off the David Malin Awards for amateur astronomers, which I think has been running for 13 or 14 years now.
Wow. Jeez, I might have to have a crack at that.
You should, with your new telescope when you've got it.
I'm getting one.
And your iPhone. Anyway, that's off the topic. We can talk about that later, because your telescope's something I'm very envious of, even though you haven't got it yet. The Parkes dish, though, was really a big step in absolutely cementing Australia's place as a world-class nation in terms of radio astronomy, and indeed that. But by then, radio astronomy in Australia had been going for 15 or 16 years. It was a fairly mature science, because it kicked off with World War II radar equipment on the coast near Sydney. In fact, one of the northern suburbs of Sydney, not very far actually from where I'm sitting now. The Coleroy Plateau, they had a radar dish there that basically was used to pick up the radio signals from the sun, which is the brightest radio object in the sky, and try and figure out what was going on. Nobody knew what this radio stuff was all about, where it was coming from. And that was also, there were a number of people who later became legendary in the world of radio astronomy, including Ruby Payne Scott, who was the world's first radio astronomer. She worked for what was then the Radio Physics Laboratory, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, which is the forerunner of today's CSIRO. And they had another one at Dover Heights, which is in a different part of Sydney. So fantastic stuff. Then the radio telescope was built. It was, I think, the biggest in the world at the time. The only other one competing, and I can't remember the diameter of the other one. Parkes is 64 metres in diameter, but 1957 saw the building of the Jodrell Bank radio telescope in a place not very far from Manchester in the north of England by another individual who became a legend, Sir Bernard Lovell. He was very much a name that was always in the media when I was growing up. So the between them, the Parkes dish and the Jodrell Bank dish really revolutionised radio astronomy in those early years.
Jodrell Bank is bigger; it's 76 metres.
Yeah, okay, that sounds right. But Parkes can lay a claim to being one of the most advanced radio telescopes in the world. It was using receivers that I think were probably better than what they had in Britain. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
Once again, these were all X-radar receivers. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I just said maybe you're right that it technologically was probably the best telescope, radio telescope in the world at the time. but it's kept up, which is good.
Yeah, it has. And today it's got state-of-the-art cryogenic PAFs. A PAF is a phased array feed. These are basically image sensors for radio telescopes, which have been pioneered here in Australia by CSIRO. Extraordinary story. One of the other things I like about the Parkes story is, and this is fairly well known, including the diagram that's in John's article, one of the engineers who looked at the issue of building this giant radio dish and how you might actually engineer it so it wasn't going to fall over or blow over with the wind. It was Barnes Wallis, who was the famous engineer who devised the bouncing bombs that were used in the Dam Busters raid in 1940, whatever it was, 42 or thereabouts. Barnes Wallis, very well known and very highly respected engineer. He also had a shot at designing the Parkes dish. His design was not the one that was eventually chosen, but there's a picture of it in John's article.
That's amazing. That is incredible. I suppose it's achieved a lot in 60 years, but I suppose most Australians connect the Parkes Radio Telescope not only with the movie called The Dish, which is a funny Australian film if you want to watch it, but the serious side of it was that The Dish was really instrumental in getting some of that that imagery and audio from the Apollo 11 mission, and those images went around the world. So it was a key player in that particular event.
Indeed, it was, along with, and it's always worth mentioning this, along with the Tidbinbilla antenna as well, which is in Canberra, and that they shared the glory with all that. They tend to be the forgotten ones, but it's very interesting. I know, I think he was the chief engineer there at the time, Mike Dinn, his name is, if I remember rightly. And it turns out, Mike and I have spoken a number of times. He's about 10 years older than me, but it turns out that he and I used to get the same bus to school in Yorkshire. So,
that's crazy.
He was probably a bit ahead of me, but it was the same bus that we used to get. Yeah.
The telescope's price tag back then was $1.4 million.
Exactly.
And,
well, they say that's... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's $25.5 million in today's money. So.
Which is incredibly cheap.
Yes.
It was done on a shoestring, even at $25.5 million. That's in today's terms, that's incredibly cheap, really, for a telescope like that. And given what it's done, what it has achieved, not just in the Apollo issues, but it's also the instrument that first detected fast radio bursts. It's detected all kinds of things. It's detected the non-wow signals that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, BLC1, the breakthrough.
And it's detected people opening the doors of microwave ovens.
Exactly. And in fact, John Sarkisian, who wrote the article, was one of the people who figured out what was going on with that these peritons, as they were called, were actually caused by people opening the microwave when it was still cooking.
Yes, exactly right. And one other thing I like is last year, in keeping with Australia's move towards reconciliation with the Indigenous people of this country, the local Wiradjuri people gave the telescope the name Murrayang, which means Sky World, which I think is lovely.
Yeah, it's a lovely name. I agree with you. It's a
fabulous,
delightful name.
So if you're ever in the neighbourhood of Parkes in central New South Wales, make sure you visit the CSIRO facility, the Parkes Radio Telescope. It is worth visiting. I actually haven't been to the site proper. I've driven past it many times, but I went there as a kid when I came out here on holidays to visit my cousins years ago. So I'm long overdue to go back and have another look. And Judy and I keep saying, we've got to go in there one day, but we're always in too much of a rush. And
that's right.
It's one of the great failings of people. They live near these incredible things. And I remember when I lived up in Mackay, North Queensland, Fred, and that's the gateway to the Great Barrier Reef, one of the natural wonders of the world. And I remember living there, and of course, Judy and I went out to the reef and visited the islands and, did all sorts of things because, we were there, we could do it. But you speak to people who'd lived there 30 years or 40 years. Oh, yeah, no, never been there. Never been there. And it's a natural thing. And the same thing happens in Dubbo. We've got a world-class zoo here.
You do, that's
and
right.
people, the locals don't go. I mean, they just don't go. It's just, we'll get there one day. It's not going anywhere. It seems to just be a natural human trait that people come from all over to visit these things, but the locals don't bother.
You should follow the adage: use it or lose it.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Well,
sorry,
I was just going to say one more little anecdote, which is not astronomy related, but when the zoo was first touted to be built in Dubbo, the locals rebelled, saying, the lions will escape and eat us all. Thankfully, they weren't listened to.
No, but just going back to parks, though, Andrew, you really should go if you haven't been for that long, because the visitor centre there is quite spectacular. It's a really nice visitor centre with a very nice cafe attached to it, and that was funded, of course. So probably 20 years ago now, but it was funded from proceeds from the movie, from the dish.
Oh, right.
Because
How about that?
The telescope took some sort of license fee, and that went into building the visitor
Didn't
centre,
know that.
which is fabulous.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah. You used to have a nice visitor centre too, Fred.
At Siding Spring, it's still there.
It survived the fire, did it?
It did survive the fire. Yes.
I wasn't sure what survived and what didn't, but
no, it did. It's opening up slowly in the wake of COVID-19. But it's I think you can only go at certain times, but it's opening up.
Yeah, that's another place worth visiting. Getting up on top of Siding Spring and the observatory up there, it's truly spectacular. And I really enjoyed that day. We went right to the very top, and
yes,
it was supposed to be summer, I think, but it felt like about -50.
Yeah, it's always windy up there.
Yeah, it felt like you're on top of the world, though. It's incredible. So happy birthday to the Parkes Radio Telescope. And if you ever get to come over here from overseas and visit, don't forget to drop into Dubbo and say hi as well. I'd love to see you. This is Space Nuts with Andrew Dunkley and Fred Watson.
0G, and I feel fine.
Space Nuts.
Now, if you've ever thought about becoming a patron of Space Nuts, you can do that by visiting our website, spacenutspodcast.com, and click on the supporter tab. As a patron, there are benefits, and you get a commercial-free version of the podcast. You also are supporting the podcast and keeping us very much alive and making up the losses on Fred's book, by the way. And it's very much worthwhile. It's not mandatory. I would never go down that road. I don't think that would be proper. But it is voluntary, and it was an idea that came from the Space Nuts audience. They wanted to contribute to the show, and so that's how Patreon came about. You can also do it through Supercast or PayPal, however you like. Slip some cash into my letterbox. I'm okay with that. But yes, if you want to become a patron, all the details are on our website. So check it out if you so desire. Now, Fred, from one radio telescope to, I'm guessing, what would probably be an optical telescope of some kind that they think would be better suited out past Saturn. This is a bit of a different type of slant on sending a telescope into space. Of course, we've got Hubble. We're soon to have James Webb. But now the thinking is, look, we could probably get better results going out past Saturn, sticking one there. Why are we thinking that?
It's an idea of an individual scientist who's written about it. I'm afraid we're plugging the conversation
and
platform today.
They deserve to be plugged. The conversation website is excellent.
It's fantastic. That's right. So this has come from Michael Zemkov. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Who's an associate professor of physics at Rochester Institute of Technology in the United States, of course. And what he's proposing is a small telescope with a lens perhaps 6 inches, 150 millimeters in diameter, but put it on a spacecraft and whiz it out to place it in orbit beyond the orbit of Saturn. Why would you want to do that?
Good question.
So you're sending it a billion miles, 1.5 billion kilometers from the sun and the inner planets, and the reason why that's a good thing to do is because you get an outside view of the inner solar system, and that's something that we haven't had before. Apart from things like Voyager 1, I think it was, doing the look back to the small blue dot, things of that sort. But the view from the outside of the solar system could be extremely instructive, because you're looking at, first of all, the dusty disk around the solar system. The solar system's a very dusty place. It was formed from this swirling mass of dust and gas in which the planets themselves formed. And there's still a fossil of that. The last vestiges of that protoplanetary disk still exist in the shape of the dust around the inner solar system. And you probably are aware that we can actually see that with the naked eye. It's something called the Zodiacal Light, which is in your skies out there in central western New South Wales, up there in Dubbo, are perfect for seeing the Zodiacal Light, Andrew, because I used to see it very often when I was at Coonabarabra, not very far from you, when I was working at the Observatory. What it is this pillar of light that is basically sticks up above the horizon after the sun has gone down and after twilight has ended. In the direction of the sun, say at sunset, you can see this pillar of light stretching upwards. Excuse me, which is aligned with the ecliptic. It's aligned with the path of the plane of the planets in the sky. And what you're seeing there is the dust in the planetary plane being lit up by the light of the sun, which is now below the horizon.
Right.
You can see the same thing before dawn as well if you're an early riser. Really
I'll
very
have to pay
faint.
more attention.
Yeah, if you're up, you are up before dawn at times, aren't you? In winter time. It will be worth having a look. Look to the east before the sun's coming up and see if you can find this pillar of light. The Zodiacal Light, because it lies along the zodiac, essentially, which is the ecliptic where the planets travel in the sky. So imagine being able to study that. Actually, I'm just going to throw in one more piece of trivia about the Zodiacal Light. It's what Brian May did his PhD on.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, from Queen.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's just throwing that in. But imagine looking at that from where Saturn, beyond Saturn, from the depths of the solar system, or beyond the orbit of Saturn. Let's be technically correct about this. Then you're going to see the whole inner solar system and be able to investigate the distribution of this dust. Now, there is something has happened this year, actually, which kind of underlines how important that is. And it is, I can't remember whether we talked about this or not. Excuse me, Andrew, I've got to clear my throat.
Sure.
It's the mid-morning frog in the throat. Yeah. I do beg your pardon.
It's the Zodiacal throat.
The Zodiacal throat, that's right. I need one of those zodiac cubes to clear it off. New Horizons, the spacecraft that flew by Mercury in 2015, the NASA spacecraft, that was used to revise the total number of galaxies in the observable universe, because it carries cameras on board. And what they did was they looked deep into space with these cameras and could do a revised count of the galaxies that could be seen down to a certain level. And it turns out that the same calculation done by the Hubble Space Telescope, which is where our best guess as to the number of galaxies in the observable universe comes from, that is looking at the sky in the inner solar system. So it's always looking through this veil of dust of the Zodiacal Light. And the best knowledge, the best appreciation, or the best understanding we had of the total number of galaxies in the universe back in 2017, I think, which came from the Hubble telescope, it was 2 trillion. But the view from the New Horizons telescope, way beyond Pluto, with its clearer view of the sky, actually meant that was revised downwards.
Oh.
It's now 200 billion.
Wow.
A factor of 10 lower. And it's because New Horizons is not looking through this dusty veil that there is in the solar system. So that's one of the really good reasons for sending the spacecraft out to look back at the inner solar system from beyond the orbit of Saturn. But there is another one.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that if you do that, you can also use the sun as a telescope because of its gravitational lensing effect. Yeah. So you can get well away from the sun. You basically obstruct its direct light and look at the Einstein rings that form around it because of its gravitational lensing effect.
Wow.
And by looking at those and analyzing them, you can actually see objects that you certainly would not be able to see with such a small telescope. So it's a possibility that might actually allow, for example, in fact, the author talks about the possibility of mapping planets in other star systems. That is an extraordinary thing to envisage, but with using the sun as a gravitational lens and forming an image at this telescope, you never know.
Yeah,
that might be a
quite
possibility.
incredible. And he's talking about piggybacking it on some other mission. So
that's right. Yeah,
that could be a big advantage. It seems to be the way to go. You work out a mission specific situation and target, and then you think, well, what else can we tack onto this thing and take advantage of the mission, like they did with the helicopter on Mars. So
exactly.
I hope this one happens. It sounds like there's all sorts of good reasons to do it and some pretty great thinking. So if you'd like to read about that particular story or the Parkes Radio Telescope, we highly recommend theconversation.com website. Lots of fabulous articles there that are well worth reading and well researched and well told. Probably one of the best journalistic websites around, I would venture to say. This is Space Nuts. Thanks for your company, Andrew Dunkley and Fred Watson.
Space Nuts. You've been listening to the Space Nuts podcast. Available at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or your favorite podcast player. You can also stream on demand at Bytes.com.
This has been another quality podcast production from Bytes.com.